Assalamu alaikum. There we are. Like I'm at the cemetery. Okay, you all got your hamburgers? Go ahead, no, you eat. You're free to eat and get it on your beautiful blouse, and that's fine. And you can send it back to mom to clean it up. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-azim. So, I want to take a moment of silence, right? It's like a prayer moment at school, right? Texas. We are in Texas. So, I want us to, what's that in my hand? Okay, well, you think it's a Quran because it's got like, but we hope it is a Quran. I'll check. Yep, it is. It's still there. I've had this like since like I was in Medina when I went to Islamic University. That's where I bought it at. Well, somewhere there. So I'll be very quiet and listen to it. You hear it? Shh. Who hears it? Talking to them right now. Okay. Sayyidina Ali, when he confronted the Khawarij, an extremist group of his time, and he had this dialogue with them, he argued with them to try to convince them at different points to come back to the main group of Muslims. In one of those dialogues, when he was accused, you know, the Khawarij basically accused Ali of apostasy, and they labeled him a kafir, and they actually labeled Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman also as kafirs. They just like to do that. And when he was with them in one of their dialogues, and it was issue of where he let others arbitrate on issues that were issues of conflict, he said, and they asked him, you know, some questions, and he said, وَهَذَا الْقُرْآنِ إِنَّمَا هُوَ خَطٌّ مَسْطُورٌ بَيْنَ دَفَّتَيْنِ لَا يَنْطِقُ إِنَّمَا يَتَكَلَّمُ بِهِ الرِّجَالُ. He said, with regards to the Quran, he says, this Quran, it is simply that which is lines that are written between two bindings. This is authentic, by the way. Sayyidina Ali is saying this, right? It doesn't speak itself, but instead men speak for it. What he was saying was, it's about interpreting the book. That's what he wanted them to understand. You can't have the judgment of Allah. It is men who try to extract what they think the intention of the lawgiver is. So you can't say, for example, like Ibn Qayyim said, you can't say that this is God's judgment, the hukum of Allah. You can't say that as a Muslim, because these are all efforts of ijtihad. Even if you quote the Quran, you have to process it through your understanding of language, of the Arabic language, of its context. So there's always something there, as in any communication. Like right now, you're hearing me talk to you, and you have to process my words. And each of you may interpret my words in a different way. That's the normal way of language. And that's what Ali was trying to stress to these people who he was, in a sense, in a debate with. That it is we who read the Quran, and it is we, and it has always been, as Muslims, who try to understand it. Hence, from that, we get different understandings of its message. And that's inherent in the process of extracting any message we hear. Once you hear something, you have to process it, and the Quran is no different. And of course, for us as Muslims, it's like, well, why is he saying that for? Well, I'm only saying that because this is what Sayyidina Ali is saying to some people he considered were very threatening to the Ummah at the time, and about how they were misunderstanding the Quran. Because it was their reading of the Quran and misreading it, as far as he was concerned, that was a problem for them. Well, I'm starting with that tonight because I want us to understand, like, we're talking about this issue I wanted to talk about tonight, and this series was this series about one of the lectures of this year I want to do is this issue about people leaving Islam or opting out for Islam or apostasy. And I actually wanted Sister Rania, where are you at? Okay, Sister Rania, we get the paper documents. So Sister Rania has, at my request, produced a questionnaire. I would like each of you to fill out that questionnaire, and I don't want your name on it. And you can like put your hand over the answers next to your friend. But I do want to put gender, male or female. And I want you to answer the questions. And they're basically, let me look at those questions. Can I have one of those? Because they're sort of relevant for tonight's quick talk. Have you ever doubted the existence of a deity? Have you had doubts about the divine nature of the Quran? Do you ever struggle with your belief that Muhammad was a true prophet of God? Have you ever questioned Islam as a result of current events around the world? Have you ever questioned the nature, origin of God? Whatever that means. Have you ever struggled with certain objectives within Islam, such as one's pertaining to marriage, people of the book, warfare, and the like? Do you feel a lack of spirituality within Islam? Have you doubted the timeless nature of the Quran and struggled to make sense of Islamic rulings in today's world? And the answer, you can answer any way you want, like no, 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 yes, yes, yes. Sometimes, yes, I had a moment like that. I don't know. In my own life, in August 7, 1987, I left Islam after my conversion. It was at Dhuhr time. It was August 7th, 1987, and I physically couldn't pray anymore because I was internally sterile about this religion because I wasn't getting anything out of it. And I had been Muslim for 5 years and I wasn't getting anything out of it. So I just walked away, and for 1 year I had to process not my belief in God, but whether or not practicing Islam as I was in that time at my MSA at Purdue University, struggling in that environment to find what was for me a tangible faith, a realization of a faith for me to struggle with that. And it took me a year to come back to Islam, for me personally. Statistically, at least I knew at the time, that when it comes to conversions to Islam, for example, at least 25% of people who convert will leave Islam within the first 5 years. And of those, about half may come back. So there's a turnover of converts. But the reality is also, and what I had some of my students do, was to go on one of these websites of ex-Muslims and just read them. And I want to thank all of the students, but particularly Sister Sadia here, who went through, which I know was a laborious and perhaps painful endeavor, to go on this website. What was it? Reddit? Is it Reddit website? What? For ex?
Reddit, yeah.
Huh? Reddit for ex-Muslims. And going through, looking at that website, and just to basically see what were the themes of why people would leave Islam. And these are people who are apparently speaking English. And one was it's an English-based website where it's talking about probably kids in Europe, England, United States, Australia. I would assume the demographics are most like that. And the paper is in front of you. Hopefully you will actually answer those questions for me, because I'm curious. And there were different reasons that could be sort of looked at as why people leave Islam. And of these, we went through them and sort of lumped them together. And this talk tonight, which is actually not as it really should be, because there are specific issues that we need to address. They require greater attention and focus. And unfortunately, tonight we'll not do it just as a halakha. And I seriously suggest to you all, the MSA here, and just everyone else in the room, when I go through some of these points here tonight, briefly, before we break, because it is a short gathering tonight, that you need to be asking yourselves, do we need to address these in greater detail? My answer would be yes, you need to address these issues in greater detail. And because we need to be able to respond in a compassionate way to any person, a sibling, a relative, a friend. I know people personally who have left Islam. I know them personally. And I've had dialogue with some of them. And for some, they came back. For some, they're not. And the reasons why a person leaves Islam are varied, as we will see. So one of the reasons that seems to be one of the categories of leaving Islam would be what I call mom and pop Islam. This is Islam that you find if you're in an immigrant community in the United States. Your parents are maybe from India, Pakistan, some other part of the world, and they have what they understand their enculturated Islam, which is nothing wrong with an enculturated religion. That's not, religion and culture or like that. I mean, you cannot, we even take, early 7th century Arab culture and it becomes part of our religion. It's just how it is. You can't escape that. But, for example, issues about how perhaps there are issues that deal with how parents force the religion on their children or can't communicate with their child about questions they may have. Or the family has dysfunctional issues with it. The father's an absentee father, an abusive father, a submissive mother. And all of these things are couched in an atmosphere of I'm a Muslim. There's Ayatul Kursi here, and there's a surah or ayat for Nazar there, and there's Granny there with her hijab on only, and there's a Urdu channel of Islamic channel from Pakistan through the cable you've got, or the satellite TV, and these things exist that way. And so there's this environment, or you had to go to the Sunday school as a kid to learn how to read the Quran, and of course you didn't know what you were reading, and so these type of things in this environment become challenging, let alone being a first-generation immigrant. You are in a public school, perhaps. You are meeting different peoples. Your parents don't know how to interact with them. They seem to be sort of backward and out of place. And you struggle with that. And yet it all is sort of in that mix of religion. And since you maybe never got a deep knowledge of the religion in the first place, your knowledge of it is probably no better than your parents, or probably even less on some levels, that person. And factors come in where it's not tenable for them anymore to be in that context. Now, how I would address that, that's a larger issue. I mean, I can talk about atheism, and I can talk about evolution. Those are ones I can really talk about. I have no problem with that. But that's a harder one to discuss, about the dynamics within Muslim families. My own son here, Umar, this is my son Umar, he came tonight, one of my three sons. He's really into Khalid ibn Walid now, by the way. He's like into the teenage Muslim jihad. I like military Muslims, those kind of, I play football. Yeah, it's normal, it's like the faith. I think it's cool, I'm glad he has an interest. He's Turkish, so he has an interest in Ottomans and all that, and they had a big empire, and yeah, he likes that. It's cool. And that's fine. But at the same time, he'll ask me challenging questions. And I will try to answer those questions. Shaykh Naeem will try to answer the questions. But it may not be that, Mr. Irfan or Mr. Khan can answer those questions, so he just says to their child, shut up, don't talk about that, astaghfirullah. That's the response you'll get. Or you go to the masjid and it's, and it's the local imam whose English is broken, and, he's like, astaghfirullah, don't talk like that, renew your shahada right now. And, of course, as a young person, you're like, what am I supposed to do with that? Well, that's not a response, obviously. But that issue for me, I would like in the future to have a discussion on that, like the dynamics of Muslim families. But I think that's something that we're dealing with immigrant families, particularly when that's the majority of our Muslims in this country are immigrant-based, that maybe you, as young people being born here, that may be something you may not have to face, in a sense, with your own children, as you are making choices about why you are Muslim and why you keep your Islamic identity. But you may know those who still struggle. I had a phone call today from a lady, an Afghan sister, a woman, probably in her 40s, weeping on the phone to me, who she's been for 20 years since her husband died, and she's living on her own, and now she's struggling with her 20-year-old daughter with issues. And she fears that she'll lose her daughter. And so she calls me up. Someone gave her my number, and she's weeping on the phone and wants me to come down to Sugar Land and visit her and talk to her daughter, for she fears her daughter will lose her religion. And, well, I have to take that very seriously. Now, I can't restore a person's religion, but I may be able to stand there and show that things maybe not be so bad, and we can try to work to resolve an issue, or issues that need to be resolved. So the family one about mom and pop Islam, I can't say too much about that right now. I think it's something we'd have to work on, and it would require something that is much more difficult to address. I think that really works on the level of our masajid and our community, with our imams being more capable of addressing family issues. But as we all know, most of us as Muslims, and I've realized as a convert in the Muslim communities, as I am engaged with them, that there's a tendency in Muslim communities to keep things in the closet and keep things hush-hush. You don't air out things. And therefore it becomes difficult for people to discuss. Really difficult. I mean, honestly, I've been Muslim for 30-something years, and there's only once in my life where an uncle, quote unquote, an uncle, and it was in England when I was giving a talk in Luton, and after a talk, an uncle in private came up to me and talked about very private, personal things, and only once in my life have I ever had an uncle do something like that. Now, I've had young people, but never the uncle, because it's like those things you just don't do. You don't let those things out of pride, honor, whatever it may be. But one issue we find with young people is the issue within the home life that isn't amicable, that is something that inspires them towards God, let alone towards a thing called Islam. And for many Muslims, right, you lock in your Islam with God. Your Islam equates to God on some kind of mental level. So if Islam has a problem, it means God's got a problem. I can't deal with God. So some people, and as we find out statistically, it seems like that most Muslims who leave Islam don't opt out for Christianity or Buddhism. They opt for agnosticism or atheism, generally. Because there's a tight relationship between we can't make. Like, for example, it's a question I have, are you Muslim? Do you believe in Allah because you're a Muslim? Or is it because you believe in Allah you're a Muslim? And for many people I know, they believe in Allah because they're Muslim. And it's not the other way around. But for me, I believe in Islam because I first accepted that there was a deity. And then I was curious about that. But I think that's the minority place for most Muslims. That's how they are. And of course, that's a very serious issue there. Because if you start then finding criticism of Islam, and you start questioning Islam, then automatically Allah gets caught up in the bathwater and is thrown out. The baby goes out with that one. So that's a point of discussion in our community we need to understand, is that, which will be another point, is affirming the deity itself as a point of reality, irrespective of a discussion on Islam as revelatory religion. And we all should be very well equipped to be able to respond to someone who says, I don't believe in God, why do you believe in God? You should have answers for that. You should know that. And that's as Muslim scholars would say, taqleed, or following an opinion, especially on issues of creed or on issues of the nature of God, is acceptable but not preferable. Now, I can follow someone on the issue of how I make my prayer. I don't need all the evidences for that. I can follow someone and learn to do that. But when it comes to why I believe in the deity, that requires you to know why you believe. And therefore, we all should be able to respond that way. I mean, I try to do that in my own life, process that. Another point that seems to be an issue with contemporary people who leave Islam, young people, is the lack of contemporary scholars to be able to respond to questions that they have. I, for example, today, before I came, I went online, and I went on a website, and let me find the one I went on here. Just as an example of what you might find if I'm just cruising the universe of the internet. And this was a website called salafosalihin.com, and the Big Bang Theory repudiated by Dr. Shaykh Saleh Sindi, April 16, 2014. This is what this erudite scholar has said, this Dr. Shaykh Saleh Sindi. The second theory is the Big Bang Theory. In summary, and I will try to clearly explain it, This theory states the origin of creation was a simple ball comprised of a single cell, and it was tiny like the head of a pin. It was floating in time and space when it exploded 15 billion years ago. Thus, the result of this explosion was the gradual evolution of the universe. Thus, the origin of this entire universe was a pinhead. And he goes on with such erudition, and that if I was reading this, I would go like, wow. And that was just me Googling, a Muslim understanding of Big Bang. And there are a lot of websites like that. Now, I don't know about you all. How many of you guys are science freaks like me? Who like science? I have a big telescope, You can come to my home, I got a 14-inch telescope. My students come and look at all kinds of funky stuff from my telescope. I love this stuff. I keep up on it. Reading that, that first paragraph is just so full of errors. Full of errors. And yet, things like that, Big Bang Therapeutic, exclamation mark. It's like a Muslim, which is another point we'll get to, is like if you read the Harun Yahya series, for example, on evidences against evolution. What's his name? Adnan Oktay? Even if you don't know this guy, just go to YouTube and just Google, YouTube him, not as Harun Yahya, but as his real self, and actually watch his TV show in Turkey. And then you'll actually see this man that so many Muslims believe is like disproving evolution. And you'll actually see this man, and then you'll like gasp, because you'll gasp. Seriously. My father was there from Turkey, and we got him, I went online and found, some place I could watch, you could download, show live Turkish shows, and so he could like watch the news and stuff while in Turkey. He had to see that, and and he was watching this thing. I said, who's that? Who are these people? And it was like his show, Muhammad. It was his show. I'm like, oh my God, it's Harun Yahya. I'm like, that's his show? I heard, is it really? I was like shocked. Anyway, but it's like, you're mindful of who you take religion from, but the point is, Muslims just sort of, on certain issues, will sort of like take the hook and the bait, and they swallow it, without being so critical and thinking about it, which I don't blame them. I think it's a normal human thing. We have a lot in American culture, we're seeing that coming up. We've seen that with Islamophobia and the issue with Richardson, the teacher down there, and how people, how good old folk were just sort of defending that teacher, and he must have been teaching the truth about Islam, etc., etc., etc. That's a normal person thing. I don't have a problem with that. But as I still have some issues I could deal with on those. So this idea that Muslim scholars can't always respond. I've been asked questions by my students, like issues that deal with contemporary cosmology and physics, and a Muslim response to that, as classical scholars dealt with issues, for example, of the nature of matter and their reasoning behind the non-eternality of matter, in order then so that they could argue a case that the universe, the world, the alam, etc. was created. And so that was to disprove a Greek Hellenistic view of the eternality of matter. And so classical Muslims, posited the thing of the atom and this concept of the jawhar, etc. And it was, of course, a theoretical discussion about an indivisible particle. That's cool. The Muslims reflected upon that. But to now, we're dealing in a time where there's a lot of change in issues of cosmology. And cosmology is not an issue that is dealing with issues that deal with where the theologians discussed it, because it was an unknown thing. Now cosmology is in the realm of modern physics, astrophysics, etc. And that's something then, which is another issue which we'll have to bring up tonight, is science and scientism, etc. But the point is that Muslim scholars are not really oftentimes keeping up with these issues that deal with empirical sciences and how they are describing the world, etc., whether it's on a cosmological, universal level, or we're doing it, from a biological level, as far as the issues of evolution, for example. And of course, you're all here at Rice, for example, and you're being exposed to these things today. I've had some of my students here, for example, who have done pre-med here, and they've been in these classes, and they've come to me with questions about evolution, for example. And they're intelligent people. You wouldn't be at Rice if you weren't intelligent. You don't get here unless you're probably a good student. And yet, as an intelligent person, you can't find good answers on something like evolution from a Muslim. That isn't just saying, Astaghfirullah. Because the Muslim always, it's the thing. Evolution means apes, humans came from monkeys. That's it, brother. It's like, we can't believe in that. And it's ultimately that's where the conversation goes. Let alone the larger issue of macroevolution, etc. So, if you're a young person and you can't get people to answer your questions, they can't respond, and you feel is an adequately worded, articulated, researched answer, and you're looking for ulama to do that. You're looking for Uncle so-and-so who happens to be a doctor, and therefore he's going to answer it for me. No, you're looking for someone, I don't know, with a juba and a beard or something at the masjid, the imam, to answer it for him because he has some authority. And if he can't answer it, or he blows it off, that's a problem. But that is a big problem, which we'll get to as a fundamental to my quick discussion tonight. So, for example, Muslims failing to deal with secularization and materialism. How many of you here read Naqib al-Atas, his writings? Oh, I know you do. I do. You do. You would, because you're my student. You would. Who else reads him? Of course, he's one of my students. He would read him. Of course. Anyone else? It's like he's one of the only Muslims today. Even when Shaykh Hamza Yusuf goes to Malaysia, he visits him. He's one of the few Muslims today who's able to talk about pedagogy, hermeneutics, epistemology from a Quranic Sunnic base that isn't gibberish. It's real deep reflection, like you might find from a Ghazali kind of person or a Razi kind of person. Or someone like Sheikh Abdul Murad at Cambridge. I mean, you can say what you want about Abdul Murad, but when it comes to an intellectual person in the Ummah who's thinking, he's one of them. But many Muslims never hear these people. It's like they're out of their league to think about how these people are, where they're coming from on their thought. But those are the kind of people you need to be aware of in the Ummah. Especially if you're living in a very sophisticated, intellectually charged culture like our own. You have to. And when young people don't have people like that to access or never heard of them, they don't have people to access them. And the fact that none of you raise your hand except people, my students who come to my classes, who know these people, that's really sad. Particularly that you're young, intelligent people. And you don't know. Or read these people even, maybe. And to me, that's really sad. It doesn't bode well. So that's an issue that young people deal with. It's like finding people who can answer the deep questions. Not just about, why do I have to wear a hijab? Why do I have to cover myself as a woman? You can go online and Google that and you'll find a heap of answers to that. Well, I even got a video there on my website. You can find my Why Hijab and How Hijab series I did in Australia, Western Sydney University a few years back. And my understanding of the sacredness of sacred clothing, sacred garments, and the woman and the womb, creatures of the womb, which are women. That's how I see it. I have my spiel on it. But it's a voice among voices. You can find discussions like that. But some of the deeper questions that like for example, I mentioned already, you may not be so easily you may not easily find responses that you feel are satisfying. And each of us, I think, if we want something satisfying. You want something satisfying as an answer. Another issue which deals with scientism which is the argument that we have with the new atheists, is that this whole issue, the whole, how can I say, the discussion that all there is matter and energy, and if we can understand matter and energy, we can understand everything from quarks and bosons, the origin of the universe, to human psychology, human motivations. And that discourse is very modern. And when we live in a culture where religion itself is already compartmentalized, and we as Muslims, those of us, I think, like myself, try to see things more holistically. We don't try to compartmentalize everything, but we see everything in some holistic connectedness. For me, for example, I believe a source of knowledge is revelation as a positive source of knowledge. But I also believe that human senses and intellect are also sources of positive knowledge. And that's the classical view of a foundation of Islamic epistemology, is that there are sources of knowledge. You know, your physical senses, your intellect, and what the classical scholar calls the khabar sadiq, the truthful narrative. In this case, brought to you by a prophet who comes with mu'jiza, evidentiary miracles, in order that you can observe. And those are empirical things you observe, by the way, because you have to observe them. Hence, then you draw a conclusion, this person is truthful in some manner. Hence, I can take his words as being positive in nature, that what he gives me is not dhanni, speculative, but qati, definitive in knowledge about God, etc. So, that then is something that many of our Muslims have not been well able to engage with, is that dialogue to support a larger holistic understanding of things as they are, and to show that there is no conflict between, let's say, religion and science. They don't have to be in conflict. Now, many Muslims are able to process that well, but we don't necessarily process it on deep philosophy. We process it on a more utilitarian approach. So we like technology. You know, you go to the sacred precincts, Mecca and Medina, you see lots of technology. Everyone loves their technology. So that's something that Muslims will take to, unfortunately, as a larger global issue. It's not good for the planet. But at the end of the day, Muslims do accept that. But they don't have a deeper discussion on the ethics and morals of this, perhaps. So we are good at utilizing technology as a product of the modern scientific endeavor, but we're not good always at engaging in a higher discussion on, is it good for us or bad for us, etc., etc., the moral and ethical issues that arise. We're not always good about that at all. Which we have to be if we want to be people of God, I believe. I mean, you can't just take the technology and without taking the accountability that comes with it. But the Muslim scholars have a hard time addressing these things, or putting us, which has been a recent 20th century phenomena. When I became converted, one of the first books I read was Milestones by Sayyid Qutb, because in our mosque at Purdue, it was one of the few English books in the mosque library. Well, at that time, most mosque libraries had just a little bookshelf like that. You know, we had Sayyid Qutb's Milestones. How many have read Sayyid Qutb's Milestones? You know, saying people I know, okay. The message of Sayyid Qutb, which was his rewriting the idea of shirk, which was a simple message. Shirk at the time of the Prophet were idols, Lat and Uzza, idols around the Kaaba. Shirk now are ideologies. Democracy, Marxism, and communism. These are the new idols of the age. And that was a very mid-20th century modernist Muslim rewriting or restructuring of a basic concept of Tawheed versus Shirk. Therefore, if you're a Democrat, i.e. you follow democracy or democratic values, or socialist or Marxist, you're actually in a type of shirk to Allah Azza wa Jal. And that approach towards understanding this discourse on something like, say, democracy in our time was a prominent thing in Muslims of that of maybe your parents' and grandparents' generation. And as Muslims, we're still reeling from those effects today. We're still being affected by that, though most of us are not really aware how we are, but we are being. And that affects us and how we understand issues of authority. Such issues as gender issues that we have to deal with, which is one currently that we deal with in the United States, but we'll get to that. So, when Muslims are incapable of addressing modernity well, then we have problems. And we can't just leave it to, Tariq Ramadan, who you may agree with or not agree with, or someone like Abdul Murad to be your spokesperson for 1.9 billion people. We need more. We need people like you to be taking this burden and dealing with it. Another issue that is a problem for many people that make them question Islam is the whole evolution issue. Now, of course, I've given a talk here, and I'm always working on that. My ideas about evolution. Just yet, was it this morning, Muhammad? I told you about this morning. I had a conversation. She's a teacher in Germany, right? She's one of your professors there at Osnabrück. So she's one at the University of Osnabrück, their theological faculty there in Germany. She came online and was talking to me about her having difficulties in trying to engage young Muslims with the theory of evolution. So she and I are having a dialogue about that. And I don't have that dialogue often with Muslims, by the way. With my students I do, because they all hang out and I bring it up as a topic point. But generally I don't have that issue with most Muslims in my community. Sometimes young people come to me and they talk about it. But here was an educator, and she was asking me about it. And I've given that talk here at Rice, and it's a work in progress, that discussion. And my general issue of that is I don't think Muslims should have too much of a problem with evolution as a theory, no more than you have a problem with the atomic theory. That there are things called atoms. It's called the atomic theory. Because these are just based upon consecutive approaches towards observations, measurements, the whole empirical process to dumb it down. But I don't have a problem with that. And I've discussed that in public, how I think our religion allows for a space for issues that deal, for example, with observational approaches and empirical approach towards of gathering knowledge of things around us. I think it's pretty sound. Issues that deal with the other issues that are fundamental to evolution, I don't have a problem with. But the problem really is, and that's the real issue, except that many Muslims just reject evolution wholesale without really thinking about it. For many young people who go to public schools, or maybe like yourself, you find that unpalatable. So it doesn't really satisfy you. But you sort of shelf it. You put it on the shelf. Many people just shelf it away. But the real issue that seems to be problematic are issues of human origins. And that's a real issue. Today in my discussion with her, I brought up the point, recently, there has been research that's been coming out, which needs to be more looked into, about the whole issue of human genome and the issue of Neanderthal DNA that is found in Eurasian genomes. So, understanding that I've understood so far, maybe 1 to 4% of Eurasians have Neanderthal DNA in them. Now, if that is proven to be true, based upon sound empirical evidence through DNA sampling from Neanderthal bones, though they may be 40,000 years old, and trying to sequence as much as you can from those samples and compare them to Homo sapiens samples, and you're coming out through like any DNA test, like are you the parent of that child, or do you have a certain gene which is a defect that may result in, say, a birth defect, and you do a test for that type of science that you would all know about as smart people. If that same science and approach towards analyzing is saying that from these Neanderthal samples we're finding that same DNA, which is only found in modern Eurasians, then for the Muslim, how do you explain that? You have to explain that. You could easily just, well, I don't know, Allahu A'lam, walk away. That's not an answer. That's not an answer. And if this is something real that is demonstrable empirically, then it's there for the Muslim to explain it. And I guarantee you, you will find very few Muslims who can discuss that and explain it. That makes sense. How do you connect that with the Quranic narrative, let alone the Hadith literature? And of course, that's something which will unfold. Already it's a problem for me to try to talk about human origins based upon what I know. Instead of just quoting a hadith from Bukhari that Adam was 60 cubits tall and the man have gotten shorter, and ya Allah, bro, that's all you need to know. It's ilmul ghaib, and leave it like that. That's often the response we get. It's just ilmul ghaib, you weren't there when Allah created things, and you walk away from it. Well, that's not an answer. And for many people, it will not satisfy us. So, in our research, we found that many people get hung up on issues of evolution because that is something which is so prominent in your education. In your education. And it is taught as fact. With a capital F. And we need to address that. We need to have a well-worded, reasoned response to that. Another issue that is affecting young people that are motivating them, are influencing them when it comes to questioning Islam, is just the violence occurring in Islam among Muslim peoples right now. The violence that Muslims are inflicting. Now, of course, that's a question which, those who know me on my Facebook, which gets me in trouble in Houston. But I'm not ashamed of the things I post. And recently I did put a post up on that. And it comes to a serious question we have to ask ourselves in our communities, and we have to address that question. Where does this violence arise? And we have certain options. One is Islam is a violent religion, and that's what it is. It's a violent religion. And we'll leave it at that. And I'll let you all go and think about that. If you're not willing to accept that as a premise, that inherently Islam is violent, the Quran is a violent text, and you're trying then to say, well, it isn't. It's a religion of peace and tolerance, etc., with the martial tradition of the seerah, that is the military tradition of the seerah, verses that deal with qital, conflict and warfare, etc. And you have your ways of trying to put those verses together, let alone the hadith and the seerah, and smooth it all out in a nice manner. It's a good effort. Ramadan Abuti, I have his book on jihad. I was reading it recently. I've been reading it this week. His discussion on jihad is a great book. I love his scholarship. Alhamdulillah, I appreciate things like that, to read them. But nevertheless, we still have to address the issue that we Muslims are facing. Now, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I brought some of my books I read. I brought me today. This is one of the books I recommend you all read. It's The Twilight of Atheism. I don't know if you guys know who Alistair McGrath is. He's an Oxford theologian. And The Rise and Fall of Disbelief in the Modern World. Now, one thing about Alistair McGrath, why I like him, is that he really examines the Protestant tradition and Christianity on issues of how with the rise of Protestantism, that is Martin Luther, and then through Calvin, etc., there was a parallel rise of atheism and Gnosticism in Western Europe. And he does a lot of analysis of how, based upon his research of other people's works also, that there is a clear relationship between violence in religion and the rise of atheism and Gnosticism in a religious community. And early Protestant Christianity was extremely violent. And when you read that text of his, by the way, when he discusses those points, all you have to, which I did, I can substitute contemporary Islamic movements today, and basically I'm seeing the same thing. And this is a real issue. So we have to be able to discuss openly in our communities to understand why that violence is arising. If it's not because our religion is inherently violent, we have to ask ourselves, what then are the historical reasons for this arising that are not just simply issues as often quoted, which to me are factual but not sufficient. Post-colonialism, economics, issues that deal with the economies, etc., of Muslim majority countries in the Middle East, for example. Those issues are real, but I don't think just because you can't get a job is why you strap on a bomb and kill someone. I mean, a lot of people are unemployed in this country, but we don't see people going around cutting off heads, burning people alive, and bombing people just because they can't get jobs. I don't see that happening in other parts of the world. So the question is, that's a serious in-house question for us. And for those of us who've been thinking about it, we can pretty much find out where it originates from. It's not a mystery. But the problem is that it becomes threatening to Muslims when they find out that maybe what they were learning and who they're learning from is some way connected to a violent origin within this religion. But I'll leave it for that. But these things have to be addressed. I am challenged by that. I am challenged by that. I totally support, when Yusuf Islam said, "Thank God I knew Islam before I met the Muslims." I've always overlooked the heads of Muslims. I've always looked towards the Prophet ﷺ as my ideal. And I've been able to sort of like dismiss things I may not like that Muslims do. Whether it's just being pushy at the masjid or burning someone alive. I can dismiss it. I can find a way to see the truth of the man and not necessarily the ugliness of the claimant of follower. But that's an issue young people we are struggling with. And we have to answer that question. We have to address it. And we're not doing that very well as Muslims in our community. It's sort of like we acknowledge it as violence, and we're all just going around saying Islam is a peaceful religion. We're really peaceful. We're really peaceful. And it's those evil Republicans who are causing all these problems. They're the ones. Because they're just not really understanding Islam. Well, when ISIS did that burning of the man alive, which you may have seen in that video, they weren't quoting Imam al-Ghazali on the video in the quotes of scholarship. And they weren't quoting Abdul Qadir Jilani. They were quoting Ibn Taymiyyah on the video. They weren't quoting Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi, Ahmad Hanbal. They're quoting Ibn Taymiyyah. His books are found in every mosque in Houston, by the way. More than Ghazali will be found for public consumption. He's the go-to man. So to me, that's like, well, why are they quoting that man and not the Prophet himself? So I tell them, in their marketing, their execution. There's a reason for that, because he's the man who gives the fatwa that they can interpret however they want to justify it. And then, of course, we have to take those things seriously. Another issue is that Islam is just being attacked on all sides today. Not because it's like let's attack Muslims today and let's ridicule them, let's draw cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because Europeans, Western Europeans, and others are trying to figure out who these people are, and they're struggling with it. Before the violence at night, before the Taliban were a problem, and then that made us question what was going on, and people were wondering who these Muslims around the world. But after 9/11 and everything else, people are wondering, well, who are these people? And of course, rightly or wrongly, there is this whole dialogue now about Islam, the evil of Islam, blah, 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 blah. We've heard this, we see it here in Texas. And that will affect people. It just affects us. It affects my parents. My parents, when I went to study, went overseas, they said, don't get involved in those terrorist groups while you're over there. This is my mom and dad from Tennessee telling me this. JB and Helen Edwards have a farm, and they have cattle, and chickens, and they're telling me. Their son, who's like the guy who collects butterflies and grows orchids, don't get involved in those terrorists. Well, that was good advice for my parents. But the issue of that, for me, is young people are seeing this, and it's a fact that there is a correlation between the violence in religion and the rise of atheism and Gnosticism, because people can't process it. And young people who don't have enough knowledge cannot make the decisions on what is the truth on this, and so then you opt out from it, you push it aside. And then of course, another issue, which is my last one here, is just, this is what Sadia wrote here for me, and it's an important one. The emotional trauma, bad experiences, neglectful parents, trying to find your place with people. I was in Islam my first 5 years at Purdue University, at the mosque, at the MSA, and it wasn't the MSA today of you all, but you people born here. All the people in MSA were from Egypt, students from Egypt, doing undergraduate work, PhDs, the Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. Those were MSA students. They weren't. I was the only male white convert at Purdue University of 36,000+ students. Me. There are only about that many converts on the whole campus, and the other ones were African American. And there were no women presidents of MSA at that time. No way. It was very segregated. And after I converted, because I'm a convert, I'm put in the position to dialogue with the Christians, and it's Indiana, the Bible Belt. Not like I'm at Berkeley talking to a bunch of, I don't know, Christians or atheists. I'm talking to Bible Belt Christians, you know, trying to defend Islam, talk about Islam. And then there's the issues of the mosque putting in a position. Now, I got burnt out. I literally got burnt out. I mean, I had close friends. But for example, I was reading Ihya al-Madin by Imam Ghazali. And some of my close friends said, oh, astaghfirullah, don't read him. He's a deviant. He's a deviant. So I had to keep books I thought were interesting hidden from Muslims, even, lest I be warned. And after 5 years of that, I opted out. Because I came to Islam for the beauty of Muhammad ﷺ, not some type of control freakish environment of controlling everything, which I was finding myself in. Discussions around the Muslims about, well, you know, his beard's not long enough, or that brother, he does this, he talked to a woman on campus today. How does that happen in America? I don't know. I mean, God, how do you even come here without they're talking to a woman? I don't know. It's like, let's talk for a lot, But it was a different world at that. It was different, and I got stressed out. I didn't find, falah, istirah, something that drew me. So I had to really question myself. Why am I in this? And I opted out for a year. And then when I came back, I knew exactly what I was coming back for. And the one thing that was the fundamental of that was knowledge. And this is the crux of the issue. Knowledge. We are people very deprived of knowledge of our religion. And if we don't have knowledge, then we are sunk. I'm not talking about just opinions or being able to quote, or just because you have a hafiz, that gives you knowledge. It doesn't necessarily give you knowledge. I know many hufaz who have no idea what they've memorized. They can't translate it, they can't give commentary to the verses that they've memorized, but they've got the book memorized. And this is what we need. You need knowledge and compassion. Like today, when that auntie calls me up, the widow woman for 20 odd years who's trying to speak to me because she talked to other people but no one listened to her. So someone gave her me as a contact person, and then she's weeping on the phone and I'm crying on the phone with her. Because as a parent, I know what it's like to fear for your child. And I know the difficulties that person can go through. But it has to be knowledge-based, not just something emotional. Now, I brought up some points here tonight, and my advice to you all, and I know this is not maybe the lecture you wanted, the halakha you wanted, and you'll forgive me, because in the little time we have, we can only cover so much. I believe that you should seriously consider some points of discussion that you need to bring up at this university as an MSA, as a series. And you don't have to get me involved in it. No, I don't care. I'm just giving you my advice. This is my nasiha to you. You're intelligent young people, and I know that. You need to have some discussions on, more discussions on evolution in Islam that are well worked out. It's not just a guy coming up here, a woman coming up here and sort of like debunking it or saying it's a bunch of crap. No. I mean, an actual discussion on that. What are our limits within that? Another issue you need to be discussing, I believe, are some real issues on trying to argue cases for the existence of God in contradiction to the new atheism that are well worked out arguments that people can look at and really think about and are not too simplistic. I believe that you need to be a people who can argue a case that an Islamic view, a holistic view of God in the mix, so to say, is not a threatening thing. So, an extreme secular material approach towards reality is not necessarily the best approach for us as humanity. That this religion is a saving religion, but it's only going to be saving for us if we're able to contextualize it in our moment and our future. I believe you have to have that discussion, public discussion, personally, on origins of extreme violence in the Muslim world and its origins historically, and how we address those origins, how we are going to engage with them. I believe that's something that has to be done in our community. And I leave it for you all on these things to address them yourselves, because I'm getting old. I would rather be at home with my tasbih in my hand or something like that, because I'm getting old and you're all young. And I encourage you all to seek knowledge beyond your university degree. I did my degree at Purdue. I did 5 years at Purdue. I did my deal. Got my degree in insect physiology, biochemistry, blah, 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 blah. Then I worked in research there, went to Medina for a couple of years with the Turkey. And my life isn't bad, by the way. I didn't lose out. I don't feel like I'm a failure or a loser. I feel very blessed. But I really want to see deeply reflective thinking young people who, when I know that when I'm on my deathbed in this country, if it's not my own son or one of my sons, I know that someone is there, a few of you are there, men and women. I didn't talk about gender issues, by the way. That's another issue we have to talk about. That's an issue that America is facing right now, and you know that's a transition phase. America, 1970s, I went in 1981. I went to Earlham College. I applied to Earlham because I was going to do pre-med. So I went to Earlham. I grew up in the Midwest, right, on a farm in Indiana. I went to Earlham, and it was the first time in my life in public I ever saw two men holding hands. Like, oh, that was strange. Now, well, if you're in the Middle East, you see it everywhere, but that's a different issue. But here, well, people are getting married. Things have changed in my little bit of life in the past 30 odd years, 35 years. How it's changed. And that's another issue for many young Muslims who opt out for Islam. Gender issues. Whether it's women's status, that issue, or whether it's also just same gender relationships. And Muslims are getting better at talking about the women issues, but a lot of work needs to be done, I think, still. But on the same gender issue, that's like a taboo. No one talks about that. Astaghfirullah, hasha astaghfirullah. And unfortunately, when all these states are passing these marriage laws, and that's how it's going to go, by the way. The Supreme Court is waiting for that, enough states to do it. On these issues, they wait for enough states to pass these laws, and then the Supreme Court is going to go ahead and make it all okay for everyone, a law for the land. And Muslims will be sitting there as a sort of interesting group, a religious group protesting against it. Except for a few mosques, maybe in the Washington, D.C. area. And so that's something, but that's a real thing. Because I have personally had Muslims come to me who deal with same-gender issues. And I don't go, Astaghfirullah, hasha, get out of my face, dirty person. I don't ever do that. I listen. Because that's just another human issue for me, as all the human issues are, whether they're backbiting or stealing or not paying your parking ticket. Though there's not the same category, but it's the human condition. And Muslims need to be able to address that. And I think how this is going to pan out, for me personally, as I see it, is that Muslims will form camps on this. There'll be progressive Muslims saying one thing, very orthodox, literalist Muslims saying one thing, and one will be saying black, one will be saying white, and that will be as it is in the Christian community, it will thus be in the Muslim community. And that will probably be how it pans out for Muslims, I'm pretty sure. As it already is going that way, demographically it seems. So I encourage you all to seek knowledge. I encourage you all to be very deeply reflective on the issues and get involved in trying to address issues immediately just by getting knowledge. Learn Arabic. How you can be a Muslim and offer your salah, your namaz in a foreign language, I don't understand that. How you can just be happy with that. I don't know. It's like me marrying his mom and she didn't know Turkish. Oh, English, I know Turkish, and then, I had to learn Turkish. Talk to my wife when I got married. If I just spoke only English after 20 years of marriage and she's only speaking Turkish and I'm only speaking English, well, that would have been a weird... It's already hard enough. May Allah give you all tawfiq. This may not have been what you wanted. I brought some things. I hope in the future you will take the challenge of trying to address some of these issues and other ones. Some of these websites are available. You can go online to read the discussions. Of course, as in most of these type of websites and these chat rooms, there's a lot of vulgarity, a lot of usage of language which is inappropriate for us as Muslims. But unfortunately, you have to sort of sift through that stuff to sort of feel where people are coming from. And be sensitive, because I can guarantee you right now, there is a friend of yours right now, a relative, a sibling, and you know right now who's dealing with this issue about they are under sort of like on the fence with Islam because there's issues they can't get worked around their heads and their hearts. And how do you address them? We need to know and respond appropriately. So inshallah you'll take this up and you will address these things as an MSA, as responsible young Muslims, applying yourself to that, having your hamburgers and having your fast-a-thons and all the things that you do. But you are people who are, you and I are noble people, and we have been sent by the grace of Allah that we are Muslim, not because it's our choice, but because He has gifted it to us, that we are a means of healing for humanity. We have to have that vision of ourselves. You are here to heal, to make islah, to make things right, and to bring people of compassion and just and equitable and firm. All the things it takes to be prophetic. So may Allah give us tawfiq in that. May He forgive us of our sins. It's time for Maghrib. And then after Maghrib, we can come back as is your want. And then we can take questions and answers, the Q&A. I'll try my best. If I can't answer something, I've got other people in class here tonight who can answer those questions most likely, inshallah. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم الله خير.